think that we're starting to see some of these problems that are brewing beneath the surface here. You have this very positive narrative that permeates the market, especially with Trump, that everything is great. It's a new golden age in America. We're finally going to make the rest of the world pay their fair share. But I think the Trump trade could be played out, and I think the reality is very different. The U.S. economy has been in recession for a while, probably all of last year, but the data just, was rigged not to reveal it. I think that we will lay that bare this year, and we'll see the underlying weakness in the economy. At the same time, we see a resurgence in inflation. So that stagflation scenario is really endgame for the Fed. They've got no contingency plans for that. There are no banks that could survive stagflation. That's why they don't even stress test for it. I'm watching a few things. I'm watching the price of gold, obviously, hitting another all-time record high today. I'm watching silver, which looks like it's finally putting in a bottom here against gold. I'm starting to see some price action. It looks like there's some unwinding of some long gold, short silver spreads, which I think is bullish for the metals. The gold stocks, are finally starting to catch a bit of a bid. They really need to be a lot higher. I'm also looking at yields on the 10-year Japanese government bond, which I think is a big potential problem that people are just glossing over right now. The yield is at 1.45%. That is a 15-year high, right? It doesn't sound like a high yield, but when you have over 200% debt to GDP, it's a big deal, especially when rates have been 25 basis points. In fact, rates were negative for a while on the 10-year. But I think we're going to keep rising. I think we're probably going to break 2% before the end of the year and then move quickly up to 4%. And I think that's a big deal. And I'm looking at the dollar yen. I think a key level to watch is $140 yen. I think if the dollar drops below 140, it can be a precipitous decline. In fact, the dollar is starting to roll over across the board as the Dow is down 600 points or so. It's mainly a function of the expectations of future earnings. I think the analysts that cover these stocks and stock market investors in general, they have no idea why gold is going up, and they assume that it's just a fluke and that gold prices are going to come back down. And so they're not willing to put a lot of value on gold companies' earnings because they don't think the earnings are sustainable. Meanwhile, they look at the increasing cost of mining and they assume that that's going to continue. So they think it's going to continue to get more and more expensive to mine gold, but they expect the price of gold to come down. So it really is going to take a change of that perspective. Now, of course, at some point, gold prices will go up so much that it doesn't even matter if they come down. In fact, I think we're already at that point. I think even if gold went back to $2,000 an ounce, I think these mining stocks are still a good deal. And so analysts have to start pricing this stuff in and realizing that there's tremendous potential. Now, if they don't realize it, the companies themselves will. These gold companies are increasing their share buybacks. And so if Wall Street won't buy the stocks, the companies will buy the stock. And they have massive earnings to do it. And a lot of these stocks have got great balance sheets now. They don't have a lot of debt. They got a lot of cash. They're earning tremendous amounts of cash. There are companies that are able to mine golds for under $1,000 an ounce. Most of them, the cost is maybe $1,200 to $1,400 an ounce. But when you're talking about $3,000 gold, there's a lot of margin in there. It shouldn't surprise anybody that they're uncovering waste, fraud, and abuse. As I said, you can't have a government program that doesn't have waste, fraud, and abuse. That's why you want to minimize the government programs, because you're always going to have that problem. The reason that there's always waste is because there's no incentive to be efficient. In the free market, if I own a business, I need to be efficient because I make more money if I'm efficient. I want to spend it wisely. If I'm not efficient and my competitor is efficient, he's going to take my business. He's going to undercut me. So you have forces for efficiency, but in government, no one gives a damn. It's not their money. Who cares? In fact, the incentives are actually to spend as much as possible because then you get a bigger budget, then you get more powers. And there's so much fraud and abuse, much more than in the private sector. Look, if somebody tried to steal my money, I'm going to try to prevent it. And if somebody steals my money, I'm going to notice it's missing, right? I take care of my money. But the government is enormous. It spends $7 trillion a year. There's hundreds of millions of people. You think they know when somebody rips them off? It's impossible. And people love to rip off the government. Whenever the government creates a program, people will alter their behavior, alter their circumstances to qualify for that, right? They'll abuse the program, and some of them will commit outright fraud in order to qualify for the program, and the government doesn't know. Look at what happened with the PPP program. I called that out, when they first passed it, about how much fraud there would be there, because it was an open invitation to fraudsters, because the government said, we're not even going to verify anything. It's just everybody's on the honor system. Oh, yeah, well, nobody's got honor when it comes to stealing money from the government. And especially, you get to a prisoner's dilemma where all your friends are stealing from the government and you feel like an idiot if you don't steal too. It's not a surprise that they're finding this stuff. I just like it that a lot of people that didn't realize how bad government is, how corrupt government is, how dishonest politicians are. This is great that, we're shining a light on that. And so maybe we'll create more libertarians as a result of this public outage. But I don't think that DOGE is going to be a get-out-of-jail-free card to allow massive tax cuts and pay down the national debt. I think that the savings that will come out of DOGE will offset some of the increase in the deficits that are going to happen anyway. So it doesn't solve the problem. It mitigates it somewhat, but not enough, to get us out of jail. When you live in a glass White House, maybe you shouldn't throw stones, but free speech was in decline in America too. And Trump has now reversed that decline, which is great. And which is one of the reasons I supported Trump, was because of his views on speech. And they need to make the same turn in the UK. But we have to be, careful of how badly we criticize them, because, just a few months ago, we were doing the same thing. But also, there are a lot of other things that America does wrong too. So it's hard for us to go lecture the Europeans when we got our own skeletons, so we got stuff that we got to fix instead of just scolding others. But it does irritate, imagine if some European politician came to America and just started trashing us. We probably wouldn't like it. And the problem with, poking a hornet's nest is Trump has got the whole relationship that the United States has with the world backward. According to Trump, the world is taking advantage of us because of the trade surpluses that they have with the United States. The reality is it's the reverse. We're taking advantage of them. It's like the book, Tom Sawyer, where Tom convinces all the kids in the neighborhood to whitewash his fence. And he says, oh, this is so fun. You get so much enjoyment out of it. It's fantastic. And so he just kicks back, rests, drinks some lemonade, and he watches all the kids do his chores, right? And he doesn't have to work. Well, we've got the whole world paint our fence. The whole world is manufacturing stuff, and they send us over $1 trillion a year worth of real goods that make our lives better. And what do they get in return? Well, the paper that we create out of thin air for nothing. And so they've got the short end of the stick. We have real stuff, and they've got our worthless IOUs. Now, they're taking those IOUs and they're using them at the moment to buy assets. They buy bonds, which, they shouldn't buy, but they buy real estate in America. They buy U.S. stocks. So yes, in the long run, they're better off because they're getting richer because they're buying our assets, and we're basically selling our cows and then buying their milk. So we're selling off the farm. But in the short run, we're drinking a lot more milk, than we would be able to get from our own cows. But, if this relationship stopped, if the trade deficits all of a sudden disappeared, the U.S. economy would implode because there'd be nothing to buy. The shelves would be empty. And so the service sector economy can't function without the goods. Now, a lot of people say, well, we'll just make all that stuff ourselves. Yeah, how? If we could make it ourselves, we'd be making it right now. Now, yes, over time, can we make all this stuff? I guess, but it's going to take a lot of investment. And to get the money for the investment means we have to stop spending so we can save money. And then people can use those savings to build out the factories that we need, to rebuild the supply chains, to train the workers. All this is going to take many, many years. And between here and there, there's a massive recession where we're also going to have a financial crisis. Because if you've built up a phony economy on debt-financed consumption, and all of a sudden that stops, everything implodes. Now, the banks go under. The people that borrowed money to finance that, they can't pay back the loans. Asset prices collapse. There's no way to achieve the goal that the president has, which is a good goal, to be able to get rid of the trade deficits. He ran on that during his first term, and the trade deficits got worse during his first term. We had record trade deficits under Trump, but then we broke those records under Biden, and we'll probably break them again I don't know what he wants to negotiate, but all the tariffs are going to do, in the most part, is raise the prices of everything that's subject to tariffs and raise some revenue for the U.S. government, which the U.S. government badly needs. But all of the increase in costs won't be collected by the government because Americans will respond to the tariffs either A, by buying the tariff goods, in which case the government collects the 25% tariff and Americans pay 25% more, and that tariff is a tax that the government collects. Or they don't buy that product, they buy something in America instead, and the government doesn't collect anything. But if they buy something in America that in some way competed with those tariff goods, they're going to pay more money for it than it would have cost if they bought it before the tariffs, right? Because the reduction in competition enables domestic producer to charge more. So in which case, the consumer pays more, but the government doesn't collect more. Now, the U.S. company benefits because it got to sell its products at a higher price. So the owners of that business will benefit at the expense of the customers. Maybe the workers will benefit. Maybe they'll be able to get a higher salary, right? So that just transfers money from some people. There's winners and losers from the tariffs. But another impact of the tariffs is prices will go up for a lot of goods, but that means they'll go down for other goods, because if consumers have to spend more money for a lot of the goods that they need, they have less money left over for some of the services that they want. And so if you're a provider of those services and you want to continue to have customers, you may have to reduce your prices. And so that's bad news for a lot of service providers who are now going to get less income because their customers have less money to spend. So there are going to be winners and losers from these tariffs, but it's not going to provide the U.S. government with a windfall that's collected from Canada, Mexico, China. The tariffs are going to be paid for by Americans. They are going to make a lot of goods more expensive, but overall, I mean, they will hurt in a sense that all taxes hurt. Right? Whenever the government taxes you, it's a negative. Now, if the government is spending money and not taxing you, that's worse, because deficits actually are a worse tax than paying a tariff or paying an income tax, because the real cost of government is what it spends. So the government is now spending about $7 trillion a year, and it's taxing us $5 trillion, right? So where does it get the other $2 trillion? Well, it creates it. It borrows it, driving up interest rates. The Fed monetizes it, driving up consumer prices. We have to pay that tax one way or another. But the tariffs will be more immediately felt by a lot of people than the inflation, which, you know, it's already painful, but the inflation in many cases takes time to unfold, whereas the tariffs hit you like right in the face right away, right? So if they put 25% tariffs on cars, you know, a lot of people aren't going to buy those cars because if they're 25% more, a lot of people aren't going to buy them. Now, what might they buy instead? Maybe they'll buy a used car that's already here, that's not subject to the tariff. Or maybe they'll buy an American car, right? Maybe they'll buy a foreign car that's made in America as opposed to one that's imported. But they may have preferred to buy the import, but now it's too expensive, so they don't buy it.